Hey guys, Joe with Above the Tree Line here, and today we are going to be talking about using Edelweiss analytics for returns, which is actually a subject that's relatively near and dear to my heart. I actually had a party one time. A friend asked me what I do for a living, and I jokingly, but only half jokingly, said that I spend my time convincing people to take advantage of a giant lucrative loophole in the publishing industry. Wasn't that funny of a joke, but it was one of those days. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about how to do basically create a return pull list in the new Edelweiss and kind of focus in on those things that need to be returned and pulled. And it's kind of a new analysis and a new analytics that we'll talk about a little bit too. Just to be clear, in case there's anybody online here who doesn't know, Edelweiss Analytics is an add-on to Edelweiss, basically. Analytics tools in which we get your sales and inventory data from your point of sale system, and it gets sent to us each night after you close, and then we feed it into all these graphs and charts and tools, and we're able to essentially measure your inventory in a pretty intelligent way. Also, housekeeping-wise, if you have any questions as we're going through, my colleague Ruth, who's actually the project manager for the analytics tools, is online. So there's a Q&A part on your webinar tools there. Then you can type her in a question if you like. Otherwise, you can kick back and chances are I'll answer that question in a couple minutes anyways. Or you can always reach us at support@abovethetreeline.com. And basically there are two different levels of the analytics tools. One is Basecamp and one is Summit. Above the tree line, we do have a mountaineering thing going. So the Summit level is where you're able to analyze your inventory and reach all these tools. The Basecamp level is really just essentially just feeding your sales and inventory history into the comp titles area of Edelweiss, which speeds the buying process, but doesn't get you all these fun tools we're about to talk about. But kind of the gist of the whole thing and really the philosophy behind all of this is the idea that if you're not measuring something, you're not going to be able to fix it. And that, I think that is more relevant with this particular subject than with most. I mean, paying attention to how you're buying and how your customers are selling or are purchasing and all that kind of stuff is a big thing. But really, just this one simple thing, returning books that people don't want to buy, essentially, is a huge part of managing your inventory effectively. I talk to people all the time, and this is where me trying to convince people to take advantage of this loophole. There isn't another retail industry that I know of anyways where you can return unsold merchandise. It's kind of an insane idea, but when you think about it in the larger terms of how people buy for their stores and everything, it does make sense. So you're able to take a chance on a book and on a new author and all that kind of stuff, but you don't have to take that chance forever. If you take that chance and the book fails, get rid of it. There's always new stuff coming in. So I'm going to be pounding that in pretty hard here for the next couple of minutes. But mostly it's a really simple sort of thing. So I was looking through some stuff yesterday and I came across this. So here are two different stores with vastly different inventories and vastly different philosophies about those inventories. The first one on the left is a store that has turns of 6.67, which you can see down there in the lower left highlighted corner there, which is insane. I can almost guarantee if you're listening to this and you go and check your turns in the analytics tools, you're not going to see that number. It's a kind of a ridiculous number. So they essentially what they do is they buy very aggressively, but they buy the stuff that their customers want to buy. But if you look at the top screen there with the pie chart, you'll see that their stale titles in the new tool are at 4.2%. So that means basically 4% of their inventory hasn't been sold in a year, which is a pretty small number. You look over on the other side, and this other store, which has some a little bit higher inventory, they have 62% of their inventory is unsold, which is also insane, but in a different sort of way. To be blunt, this store just has essentially never done returns, and that's what that number means. Their turns are quite low, and they got to pay attention to this stuff. To be totally honest, well, it's going to get dark here for a second. Chances are that store is going to go out of business, and there's going to be an article in the newspaper where they lament Amazon and ebooks and say it was just too much, when in fact what really happened is that they didn't run a business correctly. Like, that's me being mean a little bit, but that's kind of the gist of it. So kind of a really easy, simple case study to show the difference between having a stale inventory and an active inventory. Obviously, if you're selling more books that people want to buy, or stocking more books that people want to buy, then you're gonna have a better time. So I do remember Arson at Boulder Bookstore is a buyer who I emulated back when I was doing buying. He quoted a sales rep of his, so this is a bad citation for me because I'm not citing the original source. But his rep told him early on, fall in love with your wife, fall in love with your kids, don't fall in love with your inventory. Essentially, like, your books are there, they're there to do a job. If they're not doing the job, then get something else in that will. So yada yada, that's my admonishment piece here. This is something that I always really suggest, is to develop a return schedule. So I can show you, and I'm going to show you a little bit of this today. You can go in and focus on portions of your store and your inventory that are in trouble, and you can do returns there, kind of like a piecemeal sort of thing. Like, that's really kind of more of a reactionary way to do it, which is fine in its own way, but it means you're missing a lot. And you're going to have other portions of your inventory that are going to just slowly get more and more built up and stocked up and stagnant and stale, essentially. So what I always like to suggest to people is to split your store into quadrants, or whatever makes the most sense for your physical layout. This is just a total random retail map that I pulled up. But essentially it's split into 4 different quadrants represented by the 4 highlighted colors there. If you do, now this is a really aggressive return schedule, but if you do, section 1 there in the yellow in 1 month, and then section 2 the next month, and then 3 the next, and 4 the next, then you're going to essentially return your entire inventory 3 times throughout the year, which is super aggressive. And the first couple times you do it, you're going to probably cry a little bit, which is healthy, really. But if you're going to return a lot at the outset, but then the more you do it, as the years go by, it's going to be super tight, and your returns are going to be smaller and smaller and smaller. And I always really, really suggest, if you are the buyer for your store, then you should be the one creating the return reports, so that you get that like physical manifestation of not your failures, that's not the right word, but of where you were incorrect, or you took a chance that didn't work, is what it comes down to. I think it's not a failure to bring something in that doesn't sell. But I think a lot of times a buyer, like, there's a certain type of buyer who gets super arrogant about their buying skills, and like, no, this book is fantastic, it needs to be on the shelves. And like, your customers just don't care how good that book is, they don't want it. Eventually you got to come to terms with that and either sell it, hand sell it to somebody, which is step 1 hopefully, or just get rid of it or put it on sale or something. But I always just like, if your customers are not interested in something, then you don't have to keep shoving it in their face. You can show them something new. So that's my big soapbox for the afternoon here. So we're going to be talking about the analytics stuff, and I'm going to jump over onto the analytics page now and kind of show you how we can do this. So the analytics page is a option up at the top here if you are an analytics subscriber. I do want to point out that you can play with how this is laid out. This is how I specifically like my page to be laid out, with the most popular, not yet released, stock analysis, and on down. You can move this around if you go up to your tools up here and click into your analytics, which I have a few here. But you can move stuff around however you like. And if there's stuff that you don't use, you can hide it. Just pop it down into elements not shown and then click save, and that element will disappear. I do want that though. So that's the easiest way to move stuff around. Today we are going to be skipping over the most popular and the not yet released titles, because that's more about purchasing than about doing returns. And really where we're going to focus is a stock analysis, historical overview, and the category performance comparison. And then we're going to touch a little bit on the location stuff, which you're only going to see if you have multiple locations. So if you do have multiple locations, you do have a selector here at the top. You can choose to see all locations or just a single one. I picked one that's has the stuff that I want to show you here. So within the stock analysis tool here, basically what this does is it takes your entire inventory, unless you have a filter set, and portions it out according to performance. So the green titles are those titles that are in stock, fresh, and hot. Which is kind of an amusing way to put it, I think. But basically, those are the titles with recent movement, whether they've come into the store recently or they've been selling recently. And then it gets bluer as you go down. So these are titles that are relatively stable. And then in the blue, the brighter blue here, are those cool titles. Now, those are based on a shelf days measurement, which we can get to if you click on the settings here. You can set the shelf days here. So what the shelf days measures is actually basically like how long a title has been sitting there without moving, and it really stresses number of copies on hand. So if you have multiple copies, then it's going to kind of rise up into that the cool area there a little quicker. So it's number of copies on hand multiplied by number of days unsold, basically. So some of these that we're seeing here have just been there forever. You can see this one, receive date is 2010. So 10 copies have been on hand for 3,000 days. So chances are no one's going to buy those, maybe. Some of these, I mean, if they're old, you can't return them anymore, so you got to figure out what else to do with them. Whether it's putting them on a sale cart or donating or whatever makes the most sense to how you do business. But hopefully you're catching these before that point, to before they become non-returnable. So then you can do stuff with them. You have more options that way. Obviously, it's always better to sell a book than to return it. But if you can't do that, if you just straight up can't sell the book, then do something to get rid of it. That's valuable shelf space. So what we have here again is if it's in the stale or cool area here, then it basically hasn't sold in over a year. Or if there's 2 copies, it hasn't sold in over 6 months. Or if there's 3 copies, it hasn't sold in over 4 months, right? You see how that goes. But really what we do here, I mean, you can scroll through and see each title here if you like, but really what we want to do is come up here and click into View Titles in Grid. And so from here, we have basically just a big list of all the titles. So we're looking at 8,700 titles. So this is a store that has a lot of stuff that just hasn't sold in a long time. They haven't done returns in a while. So what you can do is, if you want to go through 8,700 titles and pick which ones you're going to include in a report, you can do that. But most likely what you're going to be doing is go to Other Actions and click Select All. And that's going to select the entire list. And to be clear, I don't advocate printing out a list of 8,000 titles. You're not going to pull those. So you're going to want to break this down into chunks using the filters, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But to get this into an Excel document where you can do really whatever kind of sorting and filtering that you want on there, you go back into Other Actions and go to Export to File. Now this is going to show all your available export templates. So this is my account, so we actually have a whole bunch of custom exports and stuff like that. But what we're looking for is the E+ Analytics format. And if we create that, it's going to create a big old list. I'm going to hop over into one that I created earlier. Pull the cake out of the oven, so to speak. So I actually deleted some columns here that I didn't want. It's, just took a second to do. And then I sorted this, so you can sort your list because it's Excel. I sorted this by point of sale category, and then by author, and then by imprint. So it's going to basically be nice little chunks that you can work through. If you want to send these to different pages or different sheets within Excel, great. Just copying and pasting those in. I'm not here to teach you how to use Excel, but basically here is a list that you can essentially print. And then what I would do personally, print this out, take a Sharpie to it if there's stuff that you don't want to return, or if there's 7 copies of this, 1 copy of this, 3 copies of other ones. If you want to return 2 and keep 1 or something like that, then great. Just mark that down, and then either go to the shelves yourself, or hopefully you can hand it off to somebody else. I've always argued that this is a great thing for your closing staff to work on. Gets them out from behind the counter, frankly, which in every store I've ever been in is an issue with the people who work at night, for better or worse. Worse, really. But whenever I would do this was whenever I worked at Maria's, I would do this, and I would get a stack of books on my desk in the morning saying, hey, these are great, please don't return these. And so then I would put that same stack of books on the back counter with a note that said, please sell these. Just kind of driving home what their job is. You're not a library. Libraries are great in their own way, but that's not what you do. You're there to sell books and to hopefully stay in business and keep people employed. So that's how you create a list. The way to narrow down this list that we're looking at, however, is going to be by using filters. So I came in here with the idea of, that in the PowerPoint, there was the store map that was sectioned out. I went ahead and created returns groups. And it's really pretty simple. You just go to Add New Filter, and then POS category is one of your options, and you can go through this list and add, whatever relevant categories that you want to group together. You can do. So if you want to, do all the business stuff together, you just, plus your way down there. Plus your way, like it's a verb. So go through there, and then you just name this. I'm just gonna call this returns group 4. And then you can apply that filter whenever you like. So there's your save filters, and a whole variety of filters here. If you want to do one POS category at a time, you also have a POS filters option here. This particular store has 556 POS filters. That's crazy. So if it was me, I would group those in. And then when you print that list out, you can, of course, sort those by POS category and then author and all that kind of stuff. So you can do this pretty easily. Basically, you have those different groups. You may kind of fine tune those as you go, and you figure this particular point of sale category doesn't fit with the others, so I'm going to actually move it to another group. That's great. Just whatever you need to do. You can add publishers on here if you want as well. If you just want this to be a HarperCollins return pull, then great. Add HarperCollins to that. But in this case, there's 2,200 titles that could go away, and you just again print that out, and you have yourself a return pull list. So nice and easy. I'm gonna clear that out here real quick. So that's really what the stock analysis is for. It's also to see what you're doing well with, of course. That's always valuable information. But the next guy down I want to talk about is a historical overview. And this is where you can track your progress and see, this particular store doesn't really do returns, so you're not really going to be able to see a huge difference. But oftentimes with a store that does do returns aggressively, you'll see an uptick in the inventory and then a sharp decline when they do a big return pull, and then a slow uptick, and then boom, and just keeps going down. And hopefully it stays relatively flat. Like most stores have a inventory level that they want to stick at. And as you do that, the more you return unsold inventory and the smarter you get about what your customers don't actually want to buy, whether or not it's a great book or not, you're going to see those turns creep up as well. Everybody's got this bump here in December every year, but you just start seeing this creep up over the course of a year as you get more and more aggressive with that. And then you get with the store that I used as the great store with the 6.67 turns. Like, they didn't get there by being lazy, frankly. They did returns, were aggressive about it, they tracked it, and they made sure that they were doing things as efficiently as possible, and then that's their result. They're outrageously profitable. So make sure you track. This is where, if you can't measure it, you can't fix it. This is the measurement, as well as this. What you want this inventory percentage of cool titles to get lower and lower all the time as well. That the store, again, the great store, their inventory level, their stale titles were 4% basically, which is kind of ridiculously good. Almost unheard of. The average of what I see, we just kind of did a big calculation of all the different stores that are on the analytics stuff. I almost said Treeline. And the average is 20% stale, which is not awesome, but kind of gives you an idea of what to shoot for. So this store, they have 8,000 titles, almost 9,000 titles that are stale, but they're still below the average. So that's good. That's still a lot. That's a lot of money sitting there, just collecting dust essentially. So for those of you who maybe don't want to do the schedule, or you don't want to do returns quite as aggressively, you can do what I term the hunt and peck sort of thing, and that's the category performance comparison. So this is actually my favorite graph, where you can dive in and really see those, what does better than other stuff. Basically, it's taking a category and comparing it to your other categories, and where does it land on the map. So this is designated by turns on the vertical and then inventory on the horizontal. So your smaller categories are towards the left-hand side here. Your larger categories are on the right. And then your lowest turning categories will be down at the bottom, highest turning at the top. So arguably, these categories in the upper right dark green corner here are those categories that are keeping you open, essentially. And that is arguable. I mean, it gets spread out quite a bit, but those are going to be your destination locations. So right now we're looking at this designated by BIZAC, which I think is really helpful. But we're looking, if we look at cooking, for example, We can click into that. And when you do that, because BISAC is set on a hierarchy, you're actually going to be able to see the subgenres of cooking and how they land in your inventory as well. So you can see how beverages do in comparison to seasonal cookbooks. And then if you open the category summary report here, you'll be able to get a better idea, percentage of the total inventory. And now this is percentage of the total cookbook inventory. So health and healing represents 7.5% of the total sales and 8.79% of the total inventory. So a little big for its britches, frankly. So that's a subcategory that could stand for some returns, actually. And you can see when we're talking here, it's 177 titles. That's not too much. But if you wanted to see how that looked, you can click into health and healing, and it'll break it down even farther. So you can really dive in and see, what exactly, what categories do the best and which you think do the best but don't, like weight control here. But if you collapse the grid here, what happens is this takes those health and healing titles and opens that subcategory up in all these other lanes. So you can see, not only what should go away, here's 15 titles of that very small subcategory that could be returned, and you can easily replace them with titles that you're missing if you wanted to keep that inventory the same size. So pretty helpful that way. And then if you want to clear this out, you can clear this temporary category filter here. So the whole idea here behind all of these tools is that we not only show you problem areas, but then you get the tools to immediately fix it. Immediately being relative, there's still work involved there. But again, so you can actually change this from BISAC to your point of sale categories if you like. Now those are generally not set on a hierarchy, so you're not going to be able to dive in really to fiction necessarily, because your fiction and mystery and science fiction are all separate categories. But it's fun, if you are doing the buying for your store, it can be really fun to get lost in that rabbit hole and see what you do the best with, what you do the worst with, and all that, and kind of gauge that according to your own assumptions. So you have what you think happens when you're out on the floor and you hand sell a ton of history. You're like, holy crap, there's a big run on history books, and then so you stock up on it, and then you come back and your staff says, hey, we can't shelve anything in history. What are you doing? And you realize that there wasn't a run on history. You just personally hand sold a few, and so that's anecdotal versus some hardcore data, and really taking your gut feeling about what's happening with your inventory, especially if you're doing the buying all the time and stuff, and kind of modifying that through the use of hard data is a really powerful tool. But here, so distribution of categories here, we have the very overstocked. If you click in there, you're going to see just those. Christmas wrap sideline is in here. So this can be a really great case for using those save filters and whatnot to narrow this down a little bit more. But again, it's really nice to be able to just kind of skim through and see what's happening and what's doing the best and what's doing the worst at your store. And this is a good measurement to keep track of as well. When you when you open this up, you can export this to Excel if you like. So you can kind of get a snapshot of what's happening at your store and then save it for later, and you can really get a side-by-side view of what's happening, what was happening, what is happening, and then hopefully you'll get a good idea of what will be happening. So those are the three main tools that I would use to do returns. The stock analysis is the main one, just to pinpoint those titles that need to go away, frankly. If you do have multiple locations, you can add this noise in. So we have demonstration store 5. I can compare that to unique titles at demonstration store 2. We should probably rename those. That's just a mouthful, frankly. So what this does is it takes your 2 locations and compares them, and what is showing here are only the titles at demo 2 that are not at demo 5. And so you can see, you know, especially given a particular genre or something like that, which is actually, we're going to do that for now. Oops, I clicked the wrong thing, I think. Fantasy books. So if you want to take a look at fantasy, I got a little click happy there. Sorry, guys. But you can take a look at fantasy and see, you know, what's doing well at one store and what's not doing well at another. See how your stores compare to each other. You know, demo 3 is doing the best there. It's a relatively large category that's turning pretty well. But you can take, you know, instead of returning these stale titles at demo 2, maybe you can move them to demo 5 and see if they'll work there, or, you know, frankly, actually move them over to demo 3 if they don't have it. And then then you're trying to sell the titles at a different location before you return them. And I would only suggest doing that if you don't have to actually like box up and ship those books, frankly, because that's another expense. If you can just drive them over to your other location, then I think this is a decent practice that does make sense. But really, if you're paying for shipping to one, you know, from one location to another, and then paying to return them later on, shipping wise, that's not very cost effective. So just keep that sort of thing in mind when you're looking at this. So that was a really, really quick overview of how to do the location comparison stuff, but I'm gonna do a little finagle in here. You can go to the help pages, analytics-help.edelweiss.plus, and you get a step-by-step rundown of how to use each of those tools as well. And hopefully that would answer any questions you have. And of course, you can always email us at support@abovethetreeline.com, and we'll hook you up with some answers. Hopefully that helps. Happy returning, and we'll talk to you guys at another webinar. Thanks.